In this episode, we're going to talk about some of the simple things you can do to drastically improve employee retention rates and reduce turnover. And even if your job doesn't involve directly managing or leading people, you can apply these strategies to make your environment a more attractive place to go and to stay. Over 80% of the global workforce is disengaged, unfulfilled, or worse on the job. And that is unacceptable. I'm Sean P. Martin, and welcome to Rebase, the show that's all about profession with purpose. So whether you're passionate about your career or you just want to make some improvements in your professional life and improve the overall quality of your life, this is the show for you. Welcome back to Rebase, where we are all about profession with purpose. Turnover is a huge problem for companies these days. It seems like every single year, employee retention rates drop and turnover rates are starting to skyrocket. In 2018, voluntary employee turnover, that's people who quit their job to go to another company, was around 28 to 30%. In 2019, it's projected to be 33%, and again in 2020, 33% of employees are expected to quit their jobs to go to another company. And as a business owner or executive or manager or even an individual contributor, losing teammates on a regular basis, it can be really tough to be productive whenever you have turnover issues. And in addition to the obvious productivity costs, there's a huge financial burden as well. The average financial cost of replacing an employee, hiring, backfilling somebody who leaves, is around $58,000 per employee who leaves. And that's just from the time that person leaves until the replacement has accepted an offer. That $58,000 doesn't even include getting them onboarded, getting them up to speed, and to the point where they're actually making a notable contribution. So you have the productivity costs, you know the financial cost, but there's also a human cost to this issue. Turnover can snowball and become a trend. You could have low turnover, and then as soon as one or two key employees decides to leave and go try their luck elsewhere, it starts to become a trend and other people will follow suit. I was fortunate enough when I moved from a manager role into an executive position to be working at a company that had experienced extremely high retention rates and extremely low turnover. Our average tenure for software engineers at the time was like 3 times the nationwide industry average. People would come and they would stick around because we had a great culture, we had great incentives, the work was interesting, and overall, people wanted to come and work there and stay there. However, when I got promoted into this executive role, I was replacing somebody who was on their way out the door to go work for another startup and be a founding member in a new company. And people who had worked with my predecessor, they saw the opportunity, nothing against me, but they saw the opportunity to go and try something new themselves. And so we went quickly from having virtually no turnover and extremely high retention rates into a number of people leaving right out of the gate. So I was immediately faced with some turnover issues. And the thing is, turnover is inevitable. You can't control whether people are going to stick around with your company for a year, 2 years, 6 months, any amount of time. You can't control this. You can only hope to influence it and to persuade people to stay for a longer tenure so that you can increase retention and reduce the burden of turnover. And unfortunately, companies tend to take the wrong approach when it comes to retaining valuable employees. They usually wait until they're already bleeding employees to implement so-called retention measures. They're doing these things when people are already looking elsewhere. And sure, these quote-unquote retention measures might salvage a few employees, might get them to stick around for a little bit longer, but it's probably already too late if you are waiting until you start to see this problem really coming to fruition. It's already too late and people are already on their way out the door, and the half measures that these companies will put in place probably won't go very far to improve retention. And companies will put in place things that they should have already been doing, like raising people's salaries to market levels and introducing maybe some perks here and there or some benefits that finally get them on an even level with the companies that people want to leave them to go work for. And like I said, a lot of times these are some half measures, or they're things that companies should have already been doing, and they're putting them in place way too late. So while they're intended to improve retention, what they end up doing really is just getting companies on an even playing field where they should have been playing already. And as you're listening to this episode, I want you to stop and think, what are the productivity costs of high turnover? What projects or initiatives do you have to cancel or delay because you don't have the people in place to tackle those projects? What inevitably takes longer to get done because people are spread too thin, or because they're working on more things than they really should have been focused on? How does the quality of the work suffer? Whether that's on your sales staff, your customer support, maybe it's, like it was with me with product and software engineering. What quality suffers because you don't have the bandwidth of the people that you need? And you never know who's going to be walking out the door this week or next. And on the flip side, if you could improve retention, if you could put things in place, like these simple yet not talked about strategies we're going to go over today, if you could put these things in place and you had better confidence that people were going to stick around for the long haul, what sort of things could you get done? How would that make your life easier, knowing that people aren't just going to be walking out the door like you've got some revolving door going on at your organization, and people are going to come and settle in for the long haul? So I want you to think about that, and I'd like you to pay close attention as we talk about just a couple simple things that maybe on their face don't seem directly like the retention measures, and that's because they're not simply intended to try to coerce people into sticking around. These are things that are going to make everybody's quality of work life that much better, so that they want to stick around with you and they want to be there for the long haul. So let's go ahead and let's dive in and talk about some of these unmentioned, not talked about retention strategies, the things that you can do that nobody's really talking about, but I think when you implement one or two of these things even, you're going to find it's going to make a huge, huge impact. And some of these things might be things that you're already doing as a manager or a leader. And as an employee, they might be things that your leadership is doing for you, but there's always an opportunity to improve how you're doing these things, or to maybe just do a gut check and ask yourself, are we really putting in our best effort for these things? And are they giving us the benefits that we need? Namely here, keeping people interested, engaged, and wanting to stick around with our organization. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to set individual performance goals for all of your employees, your direct reports. And I know that maybe seems like a no-brainer, right? Well, it may seem like a no-brainer, it may seem like common sense, but as the saying goes, the problem with common sense is it's not all that common. So while it may seem like a no-brainer, a recently released global survey revealed that 85% of employees are disengaged in their work, which means that they aren't really putting in a lot of effort. They're not really sure why the work is valuable and how it's also going to benefit them while benefiting their employer. And so if 85% of employees are disengaged, and another fun statistic is that 80% of managers feel like they give their employees feedback and recognition, and yet only 20% of employees actually feel like they have received feedback and recognition from their managers. So there's a big reason why they're disengaged, why they don't understand what the purpose is of what they're doing, whether they're doing a good job, they're not getting that recognition. And an easy way to fix this problem is to set performance goals for them. And honestly, when I do this, I like to keep it simple. These goals should serve to do basically two things. They should serve to, one, develop a skill or skills that are important for career growth for your direct report. And two, the goal should serve to contribute to the team, the department, or to the company in some way. And a lot of times, if you give it a little bit of thought, you can usually come up with one single goal that meets both of these criteria, that it helps out the team, the department, the company, but it also helps to develop a skill or skills for the employee. And so sometimes you can use one goal, but other times maybe you need to have two goals. And Really, that's not that much more difficult than coming up with one goal, just having two basic goals where one helps the company out and the other one is primarily focused on helping develop skills in the individual. And so you can create either one goal or you can have multiple goals that are complementary, but maybe focused on one or the other of these primary criteria. And here's why doing this works, why setting individual performance goals is such an easy way to improve retention. When somebody has a goal that's clear and they're making progress towards that goal, the majority of people are not going to abandon a goal in progress. Seeing a goal, knowing a direction we're heading in, and then making progress towards that goal, it gives us direction. It gives us a sense of something in progress. And generally speaking, we want to see that through. It also works because as you give somebody a goal that they need to hit, most of the time they're not going to be able to hit that goal completely 100% by themselves, which means that they're going to have to engage and enlist other people to help contribute to the goal, guide them along their path towards the goal, maybe a mentor or multiple mentors. They might have to enlist other people to review their work, to give them advice, all of these other things. So now this one person's singular goal really involves multiple people. And so they have a sense of direction. They have some unfinished business, so to speak, and they've enlisted other people. And this whole concept of unfinished business is super valuable, and I think something we don't talk about nearly enough. One of my favorite authors is Daniel Pink. He's the author of books like To Sell is Human and one of my favorite books, When. And in When, he talks about, and I'm oversimplifying here, but he talks about how human beings, we orient ourselves around what are called temporal landmarks or particular moments that we identify in time. And particularly, we really focus in on temporal landmarks that signify the end of one thing and the beginning of another thing. For example, why do gyms get super packed after the new year? Because we have New Year's resolutions. And so that's a temporal landmark where we focus on the end of one thing and the beginning of another thing. And we get super focused in on that moment in time when we can end something and start something new. So if you apply this to setting a performance goal for somebody or a development goal, and there's a certain time, like maybe it's a quarterly goal or maybe it is a monthly goal or it has some sort of time component attached to it, people are going to focus in on that goal because we orient around these temporal landmarks. And again, when you think about unfinished business, if you have a solid performance or development goal in place for an employee, that person is far less likely to leave when they've got that unfinished business. They've got something they want to achieve. Never underestimate people's desire to achieve something. And if you set up a goal for them that you hope that they will achieve or accomplish in 6 months, they're far less likely to just leave and go to another organization while they still have that unfinished business just sort of hanging out there. And this is one of those things that's good to do and will help with retention, but also it's just good to do for your people and to make sure that you are getting the best work out of your people and that you're developing them so that they can continue to improve the quality of their work over the years. I mean, after all, if somebody's not getting better and better at their job and not developing new skills and not improving the skills that they already have, then why are you continuing to pay them more and more every year if they're not developing? Ideally, you should be cultivating and developing great people, and in return for that investment in your people, you'll find that they're going to overall give you a little bit more loyalty than you're probably used to getting. As the saying goes, the CFO asks the CEO of a company and says, but hey, what if we invest in our people and they leave? And the CEO says, what if we don't invest in them and they stay? So this is just one way to invest in your employees by setting these very simple performance and development goals. The next simple retention strategy that nobody really talks about is something that you should be doing whether you're in a leadership or management position, or if you're the direct reports and the individual contributor and working with your manager. And this is so simple, and yet most people fail to do this because they feel like it's not their responsibility and it's not a part of their job description. But it's super simple, And it's one of the first lessons that I learned as a young manager many, many years ago. And this simple retention strategy is to just create and cultivate a personal connection with your people. I mean, this is literally one of the best lessons I ever learned as a new manager. And it caused me to get out of my head a little bit because when I was first taking on management responsibilities, I was coming from an engineering background, right? Where primarily the thing that I worked with was code and not people. And when you're working with user stories and tasks and tickets and code and not really working on the people side of things, you can really get kind of procedural in your day to day. And so when I first became a manager and I started out managing some interns and some junior engineers, you know, all I was thinking about was like, okay, what's the proper procedure here? How do I do these one-on-one check-ins with my people? And I see other managers taking their people to go get coffee, and then they talk about something, and then they come back a half hour later, and the one-on-one's done. So procedurally in my head, I'm thinking, okay, we walk, we get coffee, I ask them how things are going, and what the status is of the things they're working on. And my manager at the time, very early on, helped me correct course and helped me to understand that it's not just about getting a status report, a download of information from these people. It is about connecting with them, building trust, building interest in their career, in the work they're doing, in the work that the company is doing. And the best way to do this is to take a personal interest in their life. And you don't have to dive deep. You don't have to ask them about every little detail of their life, but simple things, just like understanding who's in their life outside of work. Who are the people they care about? Do they have a boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, kids? Who is involved in their life? I mean, yeah, they spend half their waking hours commuting to, working in, and commuting from work, but that means they have that other half of their life, and they spend that with people they care about. They spend that on interests. They spend that in hobbies. They spend that time doing other things. So just taking a cursory interest in knowing about the people they care about, knowing about their interests, their goals, what drives them, the stories from their life. How do they get to where they are now working with you? And you can start small. You could start as small as just learning their spouse's name, their kids' names if they have any kids. How old are their kids? If you know how old their kids are, you could probably figure out what grade they're in school. And you can even write this information down if you want to or need to, just so you can keep things straight. Literally, I've done this. I've written these things down because when I managed like 5 or 6 people right out of the gate after managing no people, I had never really needed to have the capacity to keep all this information straight. So I would literally on like a little post-it note in a desk drawer write down the person's name and what their boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife's name was, what their kids' names were, just so that when we would go on a one-on-one, I wouldn't forget what their youngest son's name was or what grade he was in. And I know that sounds silly, but when you're juggling a lot of responsibilities and a lot of things, it can be super easy to just completely blank, to just like totally space on somebody's name. I'm sure I'm not the only person that's happened to, at least I hope that I'm not, but feel free to write these things down until, they're committed to memory and it's super easy to remember what the names and ages of somebody's, loved ones and family members really are. And like I said, you could start simple with the names and some key details about the people that they care about in their life. You could also ask them about their previous work history. Where have they worked before they came and worked with you? Even if you're managing somebody who this is their like first full-time job, they've probably done some volunteer work or some part-time jobs, some jobs in college or in high school. Ask them about that work history. Ask them about what they enjoyed about those particular roles and what they've enjoyed in their career progression so far. Maybe ask them about the things that they thought could have been a little bit better at those places. By doing that, they'll see that you're taking an interest in their life and not just this point, this moment in time where they're working for you and you're paying them for that effort. And as a bonus, when you ask them what they enjoyed about previous jobs and what they might have changed or improved, you're getting key intel on how you can set up an environment that they're going to enjoy and therefore stick around at. And maybe you can't implement all of the things And often you shouldn't implement all the things that they really enjoyed about a previous job or the things they would have improved. But just having that information is critical intel that most of the time managers don't bother to get because they stick to this whole procedural status report check-in approach with management instead of just opening up and being a human being, being a person. Some other things you can ask about, which I kind of alluded to before. Simple things. What are their outside interests? Are they physically active? Do they like to go running? Do they like to hit the gym? Are they a swimmer? Are they a part of some organized sports? Are they actively involved in their community or in, a church or some other organizations? What are the activities that they participate in? Going back to a more directly work-related topic, you could just simply ask them, what are they hoping to achieve in their career? And that doesn't have to be a life-altering existential question, but what are they hoping to accomplish maybe in the next 6 months, in the next year? Feeding back into our first strategy of helping them to set goals, you would be shocked at how many employees never get asked by their manager what they hope to achieve in their career. And then if they're willing to share with you what they're hoping to achieve in their career, there's a very simple one-word question that you can use as a follow-up. Why? Those 3 simple letters, why? Why are you hoping to achieve that in your career? Will really give you some critical insight into what drives and what motivates this person. And then if you can feed into what motivates them, they're going to feel far more like you get them, you understand them, which you do, but you didn't have to read their mind to do it. You just had to ask a couple questions and show genuine interest in your people. I've already touched a little bit on why this works, but to go a little bit more analytical, a little bit more engineering on you here, this works because countless studies have shown that people don't really leave jobs, they leave managers. So ask yourself, are people more likely or less likely to leave a manager that they think gets them? Are they more likely or less likely to leave a manager who shows a genuine interest in them as a person? You develop that connection, and it is much harder for people to want to break that connection. And let me ask you this. Have you ever had a relationship, a professional relationship, a friendship, some other relationship where you're kind of worried that you may never find somebody like that again? Whether it was a close friend in college and you thought, dang, I'm never going to find another friend like this person. Maybe it was a romantic relationship and you're worried that you're never going to find somebody who can replace this person in your life. We've all had relationships like that. And if you build this just level of understanding and basically simply just caring a little bit about your people, don't you think they might worry a little bit that they're never going to have another leader or another manager who cares about them and cares about their career like you do? I can guarantee the thought will cross their minds, especially if they're further along in their career and they've had a series of even just 1 or 2 bad managers in the past. Having a good manager and being a good manager is keeping the bar pretty low, wouldn't you say? But having a good manager, if they've had a series of bad managers, that thought is going to cross their mind. They're going to be thinking, what if I don't have another manager like this again? And that's going to play into any decision that they make around where they want to be employed. The last strategy we're going to touch on today, the last retention strategy that nobody talks about, that may seem a little less obvious and maybe a little bit unconventional, but if you want to improve your retention, reduce your turnover, all you have to do is surround your people with great people. I can tell you that I've been fortunate to work in some really great organizations over the years and have some really good managers, some really great colleagues, some fantastic mentors. And I can tell you that even with all the good fortune that I've had, there have been plenty of times in my career where I felt stuck, where I was disengaged, the darker moments in my career where I wondered, why did I even get into this industry to begin with? And honestly, those worst times of my career, I can look back now and I can recognize that those dark times, those were the points in my career where I was bored, where I felt stuck, where I felt like I wasn't growing, and I felt like I was just going through the same motions over and over and over again. And if you know anything about the software industry, you know that it's constantly changing, constantly evolving. New technologies are introduced all the time, and you have to grow and develop if you want to stay even relevant. And I realized that even over a span of, say, 3, 4, 5 months, if I had learned something new and I was just reapplying that new thing that I had learned over and over and over again, and it was super repetitive, I felt bored, I felt stuck, and I wondered, why the hell am I even doing this? And then inevitably, things would turn around when I would start to grow, when I would have a mentor or a manager or somebody challenge me with something new, or jump in to help me take on some monumental challenge, or when super hungry junior engineers would come on board and I would get to mentor them or lead them or work with them on a project. And being surrounded by awesome people. And I don't just mean like the smartest, most talented people, most experienced people in the world. I'm talking about hungry people, humble people who want to support and challenge one another. Being surrounded by that type of person, when combined with their intellectual capacity, with their talents, with their drive, being surrounded by those people always would make it much harder to even think about wanting to work anywhere else. And if you look at your organization right now, I'd imagine that of the people you have on your team or in your company, you've got at least a handful of really kick-ass A players. And I can tell you that the best way to keep those A players around is to surround them with other A players. On the flip side, if you want to skyrocket your turnover, if you want to just completely ruin your retention, start to hire a bunch of B players and C players. You start to hire a bunch of people who aren't as hungry, who don't have that drive, who aren't good teammates, who have super large egos, who are know-it-alls, who you can't teach or tell anything to. You start to hire some B players or some C players, and I guarantee you, your A players are going to start to wonder, why am I picking up the slack for all these people? Why do I feel like I'm doing more work for the same amount of money? Why do I feel like they're not pitching in the same way I'm pitching in? And how am I going to grow and improve when I'm carrying all this dead weight? So, by surrounding A players with other A players, people are going to be consistently challenged, but they're also going to be supported because these people get them, they're like them. And going back to that last strategy I mentioned and how you can actually incite a little bit of fear, but like a healthy fear in your direct reports when they think, man, what if I never have a manager like this manager who cares about me? Like, what if I never have a manager like that again? What if I don't have that in my next role? That fear is a healthy fear, and it also applies when I'm talking about surrounding your people with other great people. If you've worked in a couple crap jobs with lazy or just, barely meeting the bar B players or C players, and then you work at a place where you're surrounded by A players, you start to think, dang, this is so much different and so much better than everywhere else I've worked. What if I never get that again? I'm going to think twice before I consider maybe applying for another job somewhere else. And sure, you might be thinking that there are going to be some people who are going to feel threatened or intimidated being surrounded by all of these super capable, high caliber, super hungry, super humble people. And yeah, in any organization, you might have one or two people like that who are really talented, but they also get intimidated when they're surrounded by other talented people. But let me ask you, do you really want those kinds of people? The kind of person who's going to be threatened or intimidated when she's surrounded by other people is the kind of person that eventually that behavior will lead to sabotage or drama, politics, all those things that inevitably lead to an unhealthy organization, and an unhealthy organization will inevitably have poor retention and high turnover. So, do you really want the kinds of people who don't feel comfortable being surrounded by other great people? So make sure that you look at the caliber of people that you have. And if you've got those A players, make sure you don't sacrifice your standards on the values, the drive, the hunger, the commitment in the new people that you hire. Because I've seen it time and time again. You bring in one toxic person, one B player, one underachiever, one great big bag of ego, and I've seen entire organizations wither and die because of that one toxic person. So make sure that you surround your people with other great people, and you're far more likely that they'll want to stick around for the long haul. So that about wraps it up for this week's episode. Now let's go back and just quickly go over what we talked about in today's episode and these retention strategies that nobody really talks about. We mentioned that turnover is going to continue to be a major problem for most companies. When it comes to employment, as with basically everything in life these days, people have more choices, more opportunities than ever. And having high turnover can kill your productivity. It can slow your company down to a near standstill. And it can be super expensive. As I mentioned, the cost in lost business value to a company just to backfill, just to replace somebody, is around $58,000 just from the point the first person leaves and the replacement accepts an offer. So that's not even including getting them onboarded, getting them up to speed, and contributing to your organization. So the financial cost is also massive. And turnover can be infectious. So even if you don't have high turnover right now, if you have pretty good retention, turnover can strike at any time. You have one or two key or critical people decide that they're going to take another opportunity, and it can spread like wildfire. And we mentioned that there are retention policies that a lot of companies will enact, will put in place that are pretty obvious. But generally speaking, these obvious things are not always going to be enough. And most of the time, the obvious things like paying people a salary that is in line with market rates, or providing some perks or benefits that you probably should have been providing already, a lot of those things are just table stakes. Like, companies probably should have been doing those already. And we also mentioned that when most companies look at implementing so-called retention policies, it's usually when they're already bleeding employees, and they should have been enacting these policies a long time ago. And it's probably too late for a lot of people. And a lot of employees are probably already on their way out, already have 1.5 feet out the door, and it's too late for them. And that's why we talked about these less obvious policies and strategies that can really help to bolster your retention and keep your turnover at a minimum. And you can do these less obvious things that nobody's really talking about to help your people feel recognized. We mentioned that 80% of employees don't feel like they get recognition from their managers. They don't feel like they have direction. You can do these less obvious things to improve your connection with the people that you work with. You can make them feel appreciated. You can do these things to give people reasons and the means to develop and grow. And when people feel like they're developing and growing in their career, and they feel like they have a manager who's committed to them, and they feel like they are surrounded by great people, those are conditions that they're not going to take lightly, and they're not going to be as likely to want to leave those conditions. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode. But I want to know, what do you think? Do you think that you could implement one or more of these strategies? What are some of the other lesser known things that could be done to improve retention that people generally don't talk about? And I want to know what you think. And honestly, leaving comments on podcasts can be difficult, but if you happen to be catching this on YouTube or another platform where you can easily leave a comment, please do. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you believe these things would work and what else people could try. And if you can't easily leave a comment, please, I invite you to shoot me a direct message on social media. And you can do that on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram, and direct message at Rebase HQ. That's at Rebase, Rebase, the letter H, the letter Q. So shoot me a DM on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Rebase HQ, and let me know your thoughts on this episode and these retention strategies that are a little bit less conventional, and that's probably why nobody's talking about them. Hey, what's up? It's Sean again. I hope you enjoyed this episode today. Whether you learned something, you were amused, entertained, maybe outraged a little bit, I hope that you had an enjoyable time. And if you did enjoy this episode, I advise you to subscribe in your podcast app, whether that is Apple Podcasts or Google Play or Spotify or Stitcher or some other platform I've never heard of. There are a million of them out there. I know that I use Pocket Casts for my own podcast listening, but that's just because it was the best option on Android at the time, and I still really like the app. So if you go ahead and subscribe, you will make sure that you will get every single episode as we release it, and you can go back and look at our back catalog of archived episodes on anything from the future of work to freelancing and going into the business of you to how you can deal with being overwhelmed in your professional life. If you enjoyed the podcast and you want to help out, make sure you go to Apple Podcasts or, again, whatever your platform is and leave us a review. Highly reviewed podcasts reach more people. They're the lifeblood. These reviews are the lifeblood of any podcast, and we want to make sure that we impact as many people as we possibly can and hopefully provide them the same level of value that we provided you in this episode and every episode moving forward. So please go, leave us a review, and you might even get featured on a future episode. So until next time, I'm Sean P. Martin. Thank you so much for listening. Cheers.